Well, hello, Nate. Thanks for joining us today with Investor Connect. This is Nate Houghton of NextGen Venture Partners. Nate, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Well, great. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and then also about NextGen Venture Partners. I've worked with them for many projects and years, but a lot of people don't know much about them yet. And it's a great group, but tell us more about yourself.
Sure, happy to. I'll start to do this before we get started. I actually have flipped back over to the operating side recently. So I was with NextGen for about a year. Happy to chat about my work with them, but I actually joined one of their companies started by a NextGen member. So I'm doing some of that work now, but more than happy to discuss NextGen if that's helpful for you.
Let's start with that, and then let's talk about your role with ReCity and what you're doing there at the second half of it.
Absolutely. So I was with NextGen for about a year. Really interesting group that started as an angel investment group in DC, mainly a group of operators who were running their own companies and were interested in supporting the entrepreneurial community here. And basically what ended up happening was there was so much interest in the network itself that the founders of NextGen decided to go ahead and raise a fund to support some of the same investments that their group was making. So that's what they focused on for about a year. They closed the fund about 6 months ago now, and they've been making investments out of that. What's unique about NextGen is that they do make fund investments, but they also tie in the network of members, of venture partners, as it were, themselves, who are all over the country, mainly concentrated in 8 or 10 different areas, including, I think, most relevant to you, Austin. So I had a role with them for about a year, really enjoyed it, and my main job was to work with our portfolio companies. So as I mentioned, I'm very much an operator. Was focused on working with the groups that were part of the NextGen portfolio, particularly on their sales and marketing strategies, and thinking about how it is to grow their businesses. One of the advantages that you have when you have an amazing network of venture partners, of operators, is that you can actually reach out to them not only for connections but also for expertise. And so that's what I was aiming to leverage over the course of my role at NextGen.
I thought you wrote an article about that. That's the challenge I think all VCs face is how do you provide support to portfolios? And when you have 5 or 6, that's not hard. When you have 20 or 30 or more, it gets to be more difficult. And,
Sure.
Of course, with a big network, that helps. But how did you manage that process?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. It's really interesting looking at this now, at a company that's looking and thinking about raising financing. It's a commoditized asset to some extent, like the cash is green no matter who it comes from. And obviously you want to have investors who can add value. You are also right that it's a lot easier to manage with a smaller portfolio. And the more companies you add, the more difficult it becomes. What I did was I first tried to get to know what each company what really needed, and not necessarily always what they thought they needed, but what the real challenges were for the founders and for the business teams as they tried to grow the company. So once we figured that out and we identified maybe 2 or 3 different things that would be helpful, it was a matter of translating that for the network and figuring out which people who we had access to could help with these problems. I don't think it's all that different than what a lot of VCs do. It was definitely helpful with the structure of NextGen to be able to reach out to different parties, different groups that were officially affiliated with the organization in order to ask for either advice or connections from a business development perspective, whatever the case may be. But I think that it just does require some more efficiency as you grow, and obviously, to some extent it scales in a linear fashion where you need more people to manage all these relationships with both the portfolio companies and the network itself. Certainly groups like Andreessen Horowitz have done an amazing job of figuring this out. And so we did talk with some folks there and try to understand how they managed it. But I think the key is very clear metrics that align the incentives of the investor with exactly how it is the company's aiming to grow, and thinking strategically about what it is they actually need and what you can really provide.
Well, great. I mean, the other part of that article talked about how do you really move the needle for venture returns? What can you do? And maybe the better way of asking it is, what can you do as a VC that really makes a difference, given there's so many things that could be done, but where do you end up focusing your efforts because it may have the biggest return for the fund as well as the investors?
So my take in the article and what I continue to believe is it's going to be really hard to completely change the trajectory of a company based on a connection that you can make. So I think the investors who are really smart, they know that. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen, right? There's an introduction that you could make. There's connections that you can put together that might totally open up new doors that really change the direction of a company in the portfolio. That's not the norm. I'd say more often than not, it's little things that help along the way and make life a little bit easier. What I do think scales, and I think this is the terminology I use, what I do think scales exponentially is the reputation of the firm. And if you're a group that is known to be helpful, founders and operators trust other founders. And so if you're a founder asking for who I might want to involve in a round of financing, and you ask a friend of yours who's also a founder who's been the most helpful investor for you, that's not always the kind of knock it out of the park new connections that change the direction of the company. We are, after all, investing in founders because they're really good at that. But it is maybe the VC or the investor who you think is there, who you feel like is your first call if you do have a problem, and is always there to be helpful. So that's what I tried to focus on. And again, that's not to say that we don't think that there are investors who can really move the needle on some of these things, but it is difficult. And generally, I think that the transparency of actually moving forward and kind of trying and really being helpful however you can doesn't go unnoticed.
Right. Well, I like what you said in the other article on the metrics, where you talk about focusing on the process rather than the end result, because the process is something that you do step by step, and you can, and with real numbers, you can actually see where you are with it. What was your what inspired you to write that article?
I think honestly it was for me first, because it's one of these areas where there aren't a lot of very clear metrics that exist about how it is that you measure success here, and so I needed to come up with that. And after I did, I think I put a lot of that into the article as well. I think generally there's sort of a bottom line approach where you want to find something that really does move the needle for the companies, and I think that's maybe the easiest metric to follow. But there are some intermediary numbers as well that you can be tracking, things like net promoter scores, just general feedback from the portfolio companies themselves, cause and effect type relationships between something that you've done as a VC or as an investor that actually helps for the company, that helps the company move forward. So I think for me, when I was initially kind of tasked with putting together this program, and honestly now on the other side, when I'm thinking about which investors might be most helpful, it is important to think about what exactly you want and how exactly you're going to define success. And I think in a lot of cases, you do get some externalities, some positive benefits out of going through the process the right way and just generally being helpful. And I wanted to make sure we measured that too.
Well, yeah, I found that very, very useful article. But now you said you're in an operator role, and maybe you can tell us more about what you're doing now.
Sure. So I mentioned NextGen's network. One of the venture partners here in DC who I became closest with actually started a company a couple years ago, and he was looking early this year, right after launching the product, for someone to lead sales and business development efforts. And was really intrigued by what he was doing and thought it would be an interesting opportunity. So mostly sort of just a nice chance to get involved with something that I believe in, with a founder who I appreciate, but certainly speaks to the power of, I think, the NextGen network for sure. So I am leading sales and business development. The company's called Recity. It's a complete database of every project in the real estate development pipeline. So the general theory here is, while there are more and more real estate data sources, there really hasn't been any that focuses specifically on what we call the supply side. So what is going to be in the market? What's being built today? What does the future look like for real estate in a particular city? And what Recity has done is put together a very intuitive application that's easy to use and focused on deep analytics for real estate investors. And my job has been to think about how it is we package this and sell this to real estate investors in a number of different markets. So, as we think about growing and certainly, consider things like whether or not raising money makes sense, I do think about a lot of the things that I did at NextGen and the things that are easy and hard about supporting portfolio companies. And I think that helps us evaluate, which partners are going to be the best or the most helpful for us.
So is that basically a data analytics play? You're gathering and aggregating the data from different sources to make it easy for people to access what projects are coming up in the real estate space?
That's right. So I think it's an industry that's been somewhat resistant to technology. maybe more than any other. And I think that creates obviously a huge opportunity. But the fact of the matter is that people's relationships in real estate are always going to be paramount. And I think that those are where the deals will come from, and people who win in the space will do a good job of, being creative professionals and coming up with opportunities. And that's not something that we're going to change, but we do think we can give them better analytics, better data, to your point, to allow them to make more informed decisions and be creative, with better armed with more data, with more information.
It sounds like an opportunity for artificial intelligence or AI. I found you have to get the data sets first and then put the algorithms on top as you figure out what those are. What do you think the opportunities are for that?
I think that what's maybe most interesting about the company for me is, as we think about AI in fields like real estate that have been really resistant to technology, it's really imperative that we think about it in kind of a phased approach, if that makes sense. So the companies that have failed, the startups that have failed in the real estate space, I think have gone too quickly using AI. And if they've tried to replace a lot of the work that should frankly be done by people without kind of these intermediate steps. And so to give you a little bit more of a clear example, we do use technology, we do use AI. We don't use it to update our database. We think that just given the nature of inaccurate data in this space, it's important that we have people doing that. We have real informed researchers who we employ. At the same time, what AI does an amazing job of is it reminds them of what it is they should be focusing on a particular day or week. So we use technology to make the process more efficient. We also use a research team to make sure that we can maintain the level of accuracy that our customers demand. So I think that, at this stage in the game with real estate, that's the best way to do it. You can't rely solely on one or the other. And honestly, the competitive advantage that we have and why I'm really confident in this product and in this company is that the way that we have this set up is quite clever and is very, very difficult to replicate. So to some extent, yes, you're absolutely right. I think that it's a space that will be probably more and more reliant on technology and on AI as we go forward. But where we are right now with the nature of documents, we're literally looking through scanned PDFs in some cases. So you do need a research team to actually do some of that work at this stage of the game.
Well, for a futures application, it sounds like blockchain might be an application there for it as well. Do you see any opportunity there?
I've seen a lot of interesting companies that focus on that precisely, and I do think there's a tremendous opportunity. That's certainly not what we're focusing on ourselves, but I think just given the size of real estate transactions, the nature of how they happen, yes, by all means, I think there's going to be a winner or a couple of winners that use blockchain technology for real estate in the future for sure, and I don't think we're that far off.
What's the next step for your company? What are you trying to do next? Are you raising a fund or raising a round, or are you bootstrapping it, or doing a little bit of both?
So for us, the real key at this point is to grow markets. So you think about sort of the nature of how this data works for us. The biggest lift for us is to get all of the data for a particular city, right? So we started here in DC. Once we have that put in place, it's certainly not easy or simple to maintain. You need to put work into it, but it is easier than actually getting the data in the first place. So all of that is to say that our first priority is to grow quickly into some major markets across the U.S. And I think that's sort of the basis on which we think about our financing strategy is really all centered around what makes the most sense from growing city to city. So I think decisions that we make in terms of where the funding comes from, how it is that we structure any raises or do any bootstrapping will be with that in mind. We're thinking, hey, what do we open up if we have New York? What do we open up if we have San Francisco? And what's the timing for how we can do that? The good news is that we have that playbook. We know how to launch a market and we know how to maintain it. And so given that that's the case, I think that, it gives us a lot better information about certainly the type of financing or the amount of financing we want to raise, but also to our earlier points, kind of the types of investors who would be most helpful, both geographically and in terms of expertise.
So who do you disrupt with this product? Who are the incumbents that you're going to take their place given the advances of the technology? There
are, as I mentioned before, no shortage of real estate data sources. I think that the largest by far is CoStar, and CoStar is probably one of the best, if not the best, tool for what we would call demand side data in real estate. So that's things like how much is everyone paying per square foot for a lease? What's the vacancy rate in a particular part of the city? that kind of information is by all means really, really important if you're making a real estate investment decision. What CoStar doesn't focus on as much is the supply side. So we're really the first complete database that's updated with any degree of accuracy and completeness on the pipeline itself. All of that is to say that this research is often being done by individuals within these real estate firms. However, from a budgetary perspective, I think when you think about competition, that's probably the smartest way to do it. We are taking budget share away from CoStar, from Reis, from Real Capital Analytics, even some newer competitors like CompStack. All of them are kind of within the same space to some extent, even though our customers and we believe that we're doing something distinct just given where we're focusing the data set. But I think, that's the good news, right, is that there's really no other complete source for this particular element of data. And so my job to some extent is to work with our real estate investors and help them understand how critical it is to know this in addition to the lease comps, in addition to the vacancy rates.
Well, great. Well, that's a good description of it. What else can you tell us about the opportunity there, and particularly the team?
Yeah, so the founder is a serial entrepreneur. He's bootstrapped and sold a company before. So sort of knows what he's doing there, and is taking something all the way to success before. Our head of strategy is Harvard Business School alumni, has a lot of startup experience. So she is tremendously helpful in terms of thinking about the competitive set. And then we have the majority of our team is focused on research itself, led by sort of a veteran urban planning expert who leads that team. And then at this point we have four researchers growing really quickly to 6, and we'll continue to grow from there. And they're heads down every day looking through, this information for each city that they're working within. So that's where I think that the vast majority of headcount will remain. By all means, I'm growing the sales team, and that's something that we'll kind of scale up as we're into more cities. Obviously, as we open up new markets, it also opens up new possibilities for potential customers who might focus on a specific urban area. And so in terms of how we grow, that's kind of how we keep it in mind.
Well, great. Well, that's a good overview of Residy, and also appreciate your telling us more about NextGen Venture Partners as well. Was there any
Sure.
closing comments you wanted to make before we wrap up?
I think just looking at both of these experiences over the last couple of years, I think that your questions were right on in terms of where the focus is. But generally, I do think there's opportunities for smart investors to make a difference in kind of the growth trajectory of different companies that are in their portfolio. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the operators themselves to figure out exactly what that's going to look like.
Well, that's good advice. Well, I appreciate your coming on and taking time to share that information with us today. And thank you so much for the rundown there.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.